what you understand to be the main targeted areas that Spurs are looking for in this summer transfer window?
Yeah, I've learned my lesson from previous shows to be vague about positions. Don't worry, we'll come on to the specifics a little bit later. There I go again, giving away a bit of a spoiler. But positional wise, I think you summed it up very well. Goals and, very loosely speaking, a Harry Kane type replacement, even though Son can play in a more advanced position. And if Richarlison was to depart and there's interest from Saudi Arabia, then obviously there's even more need to have an out-and-out striker. So goals and perhaps more of a traditional striker that can fulfill some of the qualities that are missing after Harry Kane departed, because there was never a direct replacement for Kane 12 months ago.
At fullback, Ben, AC Milan are reportedly looking to take Emerson Royal to Italy. The Brazilian appeared in 24 matches in Postecoglou's first season in charge, showing his versatility with a number of his starts coming at centre-back, but he doesn't naturally fit the Australian system as a fullback. How quickly do you think we will see his departure this summer?
Yeah, it depends on Milan. Remember, their priority is to bring in a striker, and it looks like they're in a very competitive race now with Manchester United for Joshua Zirkzee, and that's their budget at this stage. But Milan are also actively working, so this isn't just speculation. There's been concrete talks to try and make that deal happen. And it's either going to be Emerson, who's one option, or potentially Thiago Santos, and Milan are competing with Juventus for his signature. So I expect them to strengthen in that position, and Emerson is still within their thoughts. And I would also keep an eye on Saudi and Al Nassr, who are considering making an approach. And we might come on to this a bit later. He's not the only Tottenham player, Emerson, that may draw interest from Saudi Arabia. And it may be a way of Daniel Levy doing some kind of, I'm going to call it bulk business, even though they'd all be separate deals. But sometimes people on the Saudi side go to the player, like with Jordan Henderson when he left for Al Ittifaq, and the club are there just waiting, and they haven't got an offer. And they read in the media that some astronomical wage is on the table, and they think, no one's even called us yet. And other times, like with Chelsea when they sold Edouard Mendy and Kalidou Koulibaly to Saudi Arabia, the deal makers knock on the front door and they sit down and they say, who do you want to sell? And someone like Daniel Levy says, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Saudi say, okay, we'll take 4 of them. What kind of deal can you do for us? And then they'll all be separate deals and allocated to different clubs. So keep an eye on Emerson and Al Nassr if Milan falls through. And I think it will be a surprise if we get to the end of the window and Emerson is still a Spurs player.
Now, I mean, turning our attention to the midfield area of Spurs, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg earlier in the window was linked with a potential reunion to join Antonio Conte, of course, in Serie A. We understand that Højbjerg's agent insists he can't be part of a big club with great ambition, amid rumours, of course, of a move away from Spurs. He did change representatives, as we know, over the course of the last few months. In terms of players looking to leave the club, the same goes for Giovanni Lo Celso. We understand he's looking for a fresh new challenge this summer, as there are links to Real Betis, along with a proposed offer which Spurs included him in as a make-weight for Jacob Ramsey, who we're going to ask you about shortly. We also understand that Brian Hill is expected to depart the football club this summer, although we have been saying that for the last couple of windows. So just on those 3 I mentioned there, Højbjerg, Lo Celso, Brian Hill, how quickly do you think we'll see all 3 of these players depart this summer?
Yeah, with Højbjerg, you summed it up very nicely. And all I've really got to add is that the expectation is that he'll leave. He made 40-odd appearances last season, but I can only think of started games on one hand or 2 hands maximum. It wasn't many, was it, of those 36 games that he actually started? And with the contract expiring in 2025, there will be an opportunity for Tottenham to get a fee, and they'll take that. And I don't think it will be as tough a negotiation as 12 months ago when Atletico Madrid were in the frame. I think that Italy is a more likely destination now. I'm not aware of Atleti rekindling their interest, although they did consider Conor Gallagher, for example, who was too expensive, a slightly different kind of midfielder to Højbjerg, but it shows you that they're trying to strengthen in the centre of the park. So let's wait and see whether we get a twist and Atleti return. But I'd be reasonably sure at this stage that Tottenham are just waiting for the Euros to finish, hoping that the value and the exposure raises as he does well at the tournament, and they stay in there for another game, go and knock out Germany, have a big performance, and then suddenly the value raises a bit more, and then they'll find a taker once the Euros finishes. And I do think that Italy is probably the most likely destination. Milan, for example, have been considering Højbjerg and also Mats Weifer as well, whereas Atleti, to my knowledge, has gone cold. I know that Newcastle were thinking about the player as well, but he would likely have to take a wage cut. So I'm not so sure that that one is necessarily going to happen. With Lo Celso, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because I can confirm reports. I think it might have been Fabrizio Romano first, but my apologies if I've accidentally not credited the right colleague. But somebody broke the news that Aston Villa rejected a player plus cash bid from Tottenham for Jacob Ramsey, and it was a 20 million cash deal with Giovanni Lo Celso going the other way. And I'm not surprised that it was turned down, because ultimately Aston Villa don't want to sell Ramsey. It's as simple as that. To answer another question that was probably coming later in the show, he's still seen as fully part of Unai Emery's squad, but that just tells you that Spurs are already working to try and get Lo Celso out in some capacity. There is some interest from Saudi Arabia and also Galatasaray. But 6 months ago, when the Saudis approached Lo Celso and basically said, do you want to go? He said no. And I'm not convinced that anything has changed at this point. And I think with Galatasaray, Turkey's not somewhere that he wants to go either. And then we got to wait, of course, and see what happens with Betis as well. And I think that one is probably still the most realistic possibility that he's got on the table. So there's enough suitors there that I would expect it to get done. But it's interesting that Tottenham are not just trying to sell Lo Celso to, say, Betis. They're saying, hang on a minute, maybe he's got enough leverage that we can define the club rather than waiting for an offer for the player. We can go out in the market and we can try and find who we want and then use it in some kind of swap deal or mirror deal or separate deal, whatever way you want to look at it. So just keep an eye on that situation, because Tottenham may be delaying on Lo Celso to see whether they can use him as leverage.
Eze, we understand he is one of Spurs' most desired targets this summer, and we have heard reports that Spurs are expected to up and accelerate their interest in Eze after the Euros. Now, there are reports out there that Spurs will need to be prepared to pay a considerable amount of the fee up front, a fee that in total could exceed £60 million GBP. We understand the player does have a release clause in that contract, but we also understand there are complications as to how that release clause is triggered. So be interested to know from you, Ben, how genuine Spurs' interest is, if there are any other clubs involved, and how you see this move panning out between now and its conclusion.
Yeah, I think the good news for Spurs fans looking for some box office news is that Eberechi Eze is a big one and a priority. And I think that Spurs would love to get this one over the line. Like you say, they're going to have to be a little bit patient because of the Euros. There is a release clause in the region of £65 million. And triggering it, I think, will be equally as complicated as with Michael Olise, who's on his way to Bayern. And the reason for the complication is, one, you go through Palace. And I know that might sound strange, because why wouldn't you go to the club that are selling, right? But so many deals start with an informal inquiry on the player side, try and agree terms, then make a bid. And that's legal. It's not tapping up. You obviously are transparent about it. Crystal Palace would know what Tottenham are doing. But in this case, it's a bit more structured. And as with Elise, the expectation is that you put down a formal inquiry to Palace, and then they're not just the seller, but almost the intermediary. And then they will present the opportunity to Eze and give you formal permission to speak to him. And then from there, the negotiation starts. And because Elise is gone, it is very possible that Crystal Palace demand either the release clause to be triggered or alternatively the same kind of valuation. So I don't think this is a deal that gets done in the 50 millions or less. It's a 65 million deal. But unlike, say, a Kilman, and we spoke about this before, I think it might still be the kind of number that Daniel Levy sees value at. The challenge is more the fact that Crystal Palace are flying, and a lot of these players are quite settled now. And Eze might return back to Palace for pre-season and just decide that he's happy enough where he is. Maybe he can even use the possibility of interest to get improved terms. But I think that Tottenham are going to try for this one. They're really big fans and they've got a good relationship with Crystal Palace as well. And remember too, the agent is base and half of Tottenham seem to be base. I think it's Maddison, Son, Postecoglou even is based to my knowledge. Apologies if I'm getting these agencies wrong. I should know them off the top of my head because we're talking them all the time. So I mean, Tottenham is basically base FC, which would give them ability to do a deal with a strong relationship on the agency side and on the Crystal Palace side as well. Yeah, I can see him being a Spurs player. I think Spurs are one of the front runners for Jonathan David. There's 4 Premier League teams that are in the mix. You've got Chelsea, even though they've signed a couple of young strikers, Tottenham, West Ham and Manchester United. Manchester United at the moment are the most distant because they're focusing on Joshua Zirkzee, and the other 3 could still move. And this isn't anything new. I think I did a show about a year ago where I said, Jonathan David and Spurs, watch it. And this is again because Fabio Paratici's been there pre-Postecoglou, and there is some consistency in terms of recruitment targets. So there was an outside chance that an offer would have been placed for Jonathan David 12 months ago by Tottenham, but the price was too high. The key thing that's changed now is that David's heading into the final year of his contract, and Lille know that he's not going to renew, and they accept that it's better to take a fee now than risk losing him on a free transfer in a year's time. And because there's only that 1 year, Lille are not being bullish anymore. So you might think that there's like a formula and that there's a depreciation and it wouldn't be that steep between 2 years left and 1 year left. But 2 years left, the club's got all the cards because it's long enough they can ask for what they want. And it's long enough that they might get a renewal. So Lille were looking at 45 or 50 million pounds a year ago, whereas now the price is going to be under 30 million. And with the right structure, it might even be closer to 20 million. And that's an astonishing bit of business for any club. For, as you say, a striker that's scored 26 goals in all competitions in the last 2 seasons. So Tottenham are looking at both Jonathan David and still Santi Jimenez as well. I know we'll come on to these other names in a moment, so I'll stick with David for now. Chelsea have also opened exploratory talks with Lille and approached the player camp. And everyone's been told at this stage that David wants to complete the Copa America with Canada and then decide on his future.
Another forward name that is being thrown about for Spurs and a number of Premier League clubs is Alexander Isak. And the reports that Tottenham have offered Richarlison plus money for the Swedish forward. However, Newcastle rejected the proposal. We believe that Isak is happy at the club and is under contract for another 4 years. But Newcastle may be in a position where they have to make a huge sale by the 30th of June. We call it deadline day 0.5. Richarlison's injury record has seen him miss 20 matches across the past 2 seasons, with other games when he was not fit enough to play more than a handful of minutes, meaning Tottenham would listen to any serious offers for him this summer. How realistic do you think this is, Ben, between Richarlison and Isak?
Totally unrealistic. What's more realistic is me getting a date with some supermodel or some wildly gorgeous celebrity deciding that Ben Jacobs is her world. There's just no chance that Isak is leaving.